After what feels like an eternity, we're finally at the newest installment in the Sonic series, Sonic Frontiers. Before we even touch on the game itself, I want to talk about the pre-release because good God, what a roller coaster of emotions. It all started back in that Sonic Central in May of last year. When I wasn't losing it over how Sonic Colors Ultimate looked like Sonic Colors Ultimate, I was similarly getting mad about how they refused to show anything of substance for Frontiers. The rant about the new game was probably longer than the actual trailer was, and hey, remember my old videos where voice delivery and audio quality go to die? Don't watch those. Speaking of remembering things, you know when they said 2021 was gonna be the year of Sonic? I mean, we had more going on than 2018, that's for sure. Maybe plans got pushed back, but 2022 fits the bill a lot more. The first big reveal we got was the IGN gameplay, where I gave up. Yeah, I was ready to jump ship as soon as I saw both of the IGN showcases, cause the game looked like it was gonna be the worst shit of all time. Over time, though, the game got shown off more, and it made an impressive turnaround. I'm gonna be honest, I wanted to be optimistic, but this new game was still a long time coming, and I had new positive and negative thoughts each time it was shown, so I was very mixed on the whole thing. Within the lead up to release, I will admit I was feeling the hype a bit, which was then sparked with that Knuckles animation they showed before release, cause holy hell it's so good. Starts really similar to his monologue in SA1, we see him going around helping the Chow on Angel Island before activating this weird structure and having all these robots to fight off, and Knuckles looks so cool here, my god, he beats the crap out of these things, splits the ground apart, feels so good to have him back. New character shows up and Knuckles gets trapped, which leads into the main game, and man, between this and the second Sonic movie, it is a real good time to be a Knuckles fan. My excitement ended up getting higher when the game started getting reviewed pretty favorably, actually. I usually like to wait and judge these things for myself, but I was still pretty interested to check it out after people seemed to be enjoying it. Now with that said, the reactions to the reviews, oh my god, we're back again. This is a good time to preface this by saying you should go watch the Sonic video I made prior to this. I don't usually like directly shouting out my other videos like this, but it's important in particular for this since it'll give you a good idea of my thoughts going into this game, and I'll cross-reference with it on the occasion, including right now. Same series, same new game cycle, am I right? Everyone says reviews don't matter, but they sure mean a lot when they're confirming predisposed opinions or wildly disagree, in which case you are extremely screwed. The response to that review made by Digital Trends was actually baffling to see, and while yes, I too am a bit annoyed when reviewers feel the need to bring up 06 and Rise of Lyric immediately, that doesn't invalidate their whole point, and likewise a negative review surrounded by a bunch of positive ones doesn't mean they're wrong, it just means they have a different opinion, okay? Also noticed a staggering amount of people arguing for objectivity, even though a review is inherently subjective in nature, because it's supposed to be writing about their opinion, so that's neat. I actually read through their review completely. Did I agree with it? No, but they still make an argument for their point, they explain themselves, and if they do that, that's all you can really ask for. This was the biggest example, and it was really disheartening to see, but really, it's all the same thing. It feels like this happens every time a Sonic thing comes out, so I can't exactly act surprised here, more just disappointed as usual. Opinions are good when they say the game is good, they're incorrect and shitty when they say the opposite. Harass the guy who said the game is bad and say reviews don't matter because they didn't mirror your opinion. Let simmer until the next game release, take out of the oven, do it again. Not too long after that, I finally got my hands on the game, and so what do I think? Well, if I told you right now, we wouldn't have a video, now would we? So we can only really find the answer to this complicated mix by going straight into the game, so let's dive deeper into this shindig.
Uploading AI program now.
We start with Eggman implanting his technology into this ancient podium. It causes some glowy stuff to happen, these little robots spawn in. He says he's gonna figure out the secrets of these ancients, and then he gets sucked into the podium. Now we cut to Sonic, Tails, and Amy, who track the Chaos Emeralds down to these Starfall Islands. Things get a bit shaky, and they get sucked into the cybernetic wormhole, which leads us right into our first piece of new exciting Sonic gameplay. Oh boy, Green Hill, my favorite Sonic level, right next to Green Hill, not Green Hill, and even Green Hill. I am so fucking tired of seeing this place. After blasting through Recycled Hills Zone, Sonic wakes up in a field, not having any of his friends around, and only getting some vague direction from a disembodied voice. Collect the Chaos Emeralds, defeat the Titans. So with a checklist in place and not much else to do, Sonic decides to head out and do what the voices in his head tell him to. First thing to check out before you even get into the game, the new voice direction. This is definitely an acquired taste, but you know what? I really like Roger's deeper take on Sonic. I feel like him doing the higher-pitched Sonic voice always sounded a bit like he was straining himself. The deeper voice sounds a lot more natural, and he also does switch to a more peppy and higher inflection on occasion. Sometimes he can get a little too low, and then that sounds pretty off, but all around, it's good, I like it. I feel like it sounds a lot better though, cause man, the voice direction and writing feels so much better in this game. No more forced jokes, the tone feels consistent across the board, it's like there's actual stakes now. It's almost like they're trying this time. I really dig the character interactions here too, but I'm gonna save that for when we talk about each of the islands. My only complaint with the writing has to do with Sonic's random lines when running around. Occasionally he'll be like, hey, this reminds me of this thing, or hey, I wonder what insert character would think about this. And at some point it starts to sound a bit forced. Like, I appreciate they're calling back to older locations and characters. I am genuinely struggling to remember the last time Jet was mentioned before this, but it could have been done a lot more naturally and not make it feel like, hey, we're referencing this thing from an old game. It's cool how Sonic referencing Tangle means it's only an inevitability until one of the IDW characters appears in the games, but for a lot of other quips, they can sound like Gex quotes, pretty much.
At this point, I wouldn't mind Shadow lending me a hand.
I want to get into Control now, since that was a big point for me when I talked about the Game Awards showing a year ago, and first and foremost, they did something pretty interesting with how the control is set up. Firstly, there's a choice between action style, intended for all the people new to the series, and a high-speed style, for all the people who own this shit. After that, though, you also have all these options and sliders for your movement, stuff like turning, speed, acceleration, boost speed. You have a lot of options over all these. Now, being the lunatic I am, I naturally chose high-speed style, set all the sliders to max, and decided to see how things panned out. I was a bit worried it would feel unwieldy, but no, I actually thought it wasn't half bad. It's actually my preferred setup. The general handling feels pretty good, but there's all these small oddities to Sonic's control that don't feel great. For instance, you lose pretty much all momentum when jumping, and I don't know why that's even a thing, considering you can at least hold speed during a jumping forces, but here, if you're boosting, jumping will instantly kill any speed you have, which is really bad. You can't even launch yourself off hills by jumping off them while boosting, you just kinda go upward a little bit. They tried to say on Twitter that this game does have momentum, because look, you can launch yourself off rails, but that feels disingenuous because you can only do this momentum jump off a rail. Credit where it's due, it does feel good to launch off rails to either move fast or get up to high areas, especially in the second island, which has a lot more vertical terrain. I just wish I could do that on the ground instead of having to rely on rails. Next, we're gonna need a bit of setup going into this next complaint, but if you fling yourself off ramps or like small rocks in the ground or whatever, you go into this mode where you can do tricks, which will be important later. Now, in this game, for some reason, Sonic feels stuck to the ground, and it takes him a lot to fly off terrain, and more often he'll cling onto it and it feels really unnatural. This leads into that there are some areas in this game I feel like I should be flipping off into a trick, but instead I'll run at a damn near 90-degree angle and stick onto the floor. Either that or I'll stick onto the ground for a bit and then fly off later than I probably should have. It just doesn't feel good, and it's not helped by the fact that it feels really inconsistent, cause I can't fly off of flat land, but I can fly off of the small little rocks sticking out of the ground that Sonic just magnetizes himself to. Despite Sonic being perpetually stuck to the ground though, climbing up mountains is pretty much luck-based, because depending on the angle you tackle it, it locks you into this sliding down animation, and you can't do anything until you fully slide down. They put in the drop dash from Mania in this game to try and help you with this, but it not only feels redundant, it's also inconsistent. So basically, the drop dash works just like how it does in Mania. It would have felt better in my opinion if you used it by holding jump after a double jump instead of pressing A a third time, but whatever, I like nitpicking. It's been put in so that way you can drop dash at a mountain to zoom up it, but half the time you slide down anyway, and I also don't know why the drop dash was needed for this when the boost would have worked fine. The only other thing you can use it for is zooming downhill, but you don't gain as much speed as you would rolling downhill in the classic or adventure games, so again, just boost. In my opinion, I feel like these two actions could have coexisted if the boost would have been used to get speed right now, but in exchange you have a lesser max speed that you could reach in comparison to the drop dash. Meanwhile, the drop dash requires you to have a hill in front of you and requires you to rev it up first, but in exchange you're able to possibly move faster once you get everything situated. Oh yeah, there's also another momentum-related issue. Running normally has a cap on how fast you can move, and the cap isn't affected by uphills or downhills, so even if you're running down a steep incline, you won't be gaining any speed from it. On top of that, actions like air boosting, stomping, and double jumping don't get reset after doing things like hitting springs or bouncing off poles. This is really dumb because it limits your movement options and just feels wrong in comparison to the previous games when there was no reason to change it. When I saw two poles lined up on a wall for the first time and I couldn't stomp on both going up, I know it's a small thing, but it really annoyed me being only able to stomp into one, because these things don't reset until you touch the floor and nothing else. I feel like the base idea of the movement feels good, but there's just these smaller systems that don't work like they should, and so it feels really clunky in areas. The general control here, though, I think is pretty good. In the previous Boost game, Sonic felt really heavy, but here he feels more snappy and precise, which I feel helps in this game's favor, since it tries to do more platforming stuff again. On top of this, the boost feels really nice too, since it keeps that snappy movement instead of having you gun down the lane like a bowling ball like in past games. While you could argue it makes Sonic feel like he doesn't have as much weight, I think being able to move around more freely is a good compromise. On top of that, unlike previous games where your boost direction depended on where you were looking, in Frontiers it's about what direction you're holding, meaning you can blast in the desired direction instantly, which is especially good with the air boost since they kept the physics of it from forces, which I actually kinda liked. Weird point of note though, the boost feels slower than in previous games for some reason, but I do want to save that for later. On a smaller note though, controls got mixed up from previous Boost games, and I think it's for the better. The double jump is back from Colors and Forces, which is mapped to hitting jumping mid-air again, but now the homing attack is on the X button instead. For context, I'm using an Xbox controller. I like it because now I don't have to worry about using the homing attack when I want to double jump, even though I would have liked if this meant we got to use the air dash from Unleashed and Generations as well. This does mean, though, now you can use the homing attack while on the ground, which feels really good. But if the homing attack is the only person taking up the X button, what is the boost put onto? Well, it's now been moved to the right trigger on your controller. You know, like Sonic Omens. That is genuinely the first thing I thought of. Boost being moved feels a bit weird since it's been pretty consistent where it's been mapped across all these games. I got used to the homing attack being moved quicker since Unleashed had it on X as well, but the boost is a bit weirder because now boosting and quick stepping is real awkward, and using the stick to quick step is a bit awkward and feels really sensitive. Also, another game without the drift, really? There aren't a ton of areas to use it, but it's an open world game. More movement options are always a good thing. There's this one cyberspace level that has these dash panels that put you in a drift mode, kind of like in Colors, but if this is how it would control, maybe it's a good thing I can't drift because this is abhorrent. That being said, it's just nice to have a lot of actions in a Sonic game again and not have the problem of them all being binded to the same button, which felt like an annoying trend for a long time. Finally, there's the new Psy-Loop ability. Holding Y lets you draw a line to circle objects or just draw things on the floor or whatever. You mainly use it to deal with enemies, and sometimes they'll have their defenses up and you need to loop them to pop them up to start beating their ass. You can also draw an infinity symbol on the ground for infinite boost for a little bit, or make a circle to get rings. This is broken because that means you can spawn sizable amounts of rings at will, and in this game you have a ring cap, and if you cap it out you'll go into this electricity mode. It kinda looks like the movie, I like it. But the thing is, you move extremely fast like this, and since you have no reason to never not be in this form, why wouldn't you just spawn a bunch of rings to get up to the cap quickly? This also leads into combat, which this early into the game is really basic and left a bad first impression if you ask me. This tutorial fight with Ninja made me extremely scared because it's literally just you mashing X until it dies. It's kinda like Shadow in 06, funnily enough. After a bit though, you get some skill points for some new abilities, which on the first island will usually be the Phantom Rush, which gives you a big attack boost when your combo meter is maxed out, the Stomp Attack, which is a powerful single hit, Wild Rush, a move you can perform after a dodge, and the Sonic Boom, which this early on is broken because you can just hold it down and shred through enemies. You can get skill points by circling these signs with the Psy-Loop, killing enemies, or doing tricks, which I think is a pretty neat way of getting them. It encourages you to do flippy shit to get more upgrade points. Before we get into the open world proper, though, the tutorial gets us introduced to the cyberspace stages, and I want to rip this band-aid off right now, so let's get into this. The first thing that hits you as soon as you get into these levels is the fact that Sonic controls completely differently here compared to the open world, and by different, I mean worse. While in the open world you could tweak the controls to fit your desires, here you're locked to one control style that feels extremely sluggish and has horrible mid-air turning. It genuinely gave me Crash 1 flashbacks and made any 3D platforming a pain in the ass. Also, an interesting thing I noticed is that you can't do your combat stuff in cyberspace, which is fine, but if they were going to change stuff in these stages, I wish they made the homing attack faster. It's really slow normally, which I'm not too annoyed by since it feels a lot better when in combat, but when you're doing normal Sonic levels, it creates this lag between homing attacks that's even worse than the one in 06. And speaking of small things that upset me, the physics here are for the most part good, but at other times it starts reminding me of Sonic 4, and then I'm not enjoying myself anymore. You want cool and original locations? Fuck you. Green Hill, Chemical Plant, Sky Sanctuary. Get me out of here. There's an original city stage, and it actually looks really cool, but it's the only original thing here. Why is that, you ask? Well, these 4 level themes are the only ones in the entire game. For every cyberspace level, you'll be stuck in one of these places, and I don't care what excuse they give, like they're running through Sonic's memories. Not only is that lame as fuck, it's also pretty lazy. I saw some people drawing comparisons to when they put Whomp's Fortress in Mario Galaxy 2 or fighting Wispy Woods in every Kirby game, but at least with the tree they did something new with him each time, and for Whomp's Fortress, 1, I didn't have to look at it in every game for the past 4 games before this, and 2, there were a wealth of new locations in Galaxy 2, and yeah, we have the open world, but couldn't we get originality in the cyberspace stages as well? Even if someone in the office was gonna die if we didn't reuse locations, why not reuse them in a cooler way that fits within the context of Sonic's scrambled memories? The idea I had was why not combine past locations to make for new and interesting spins while recontextualizing them in a way that makes them something we haven't seen before. Just for some examples I threw together, how about combining Adabat and Lava Mountain, let's just say those. Having the jungle catch fire from these volcanoes being inserted where they really shouldn't be, combining running on water with the cannons for a unique challenge, maybe Westopolis in Crisis City. Since Sonic appears in Westopolis, he would have memory of it, and we get to see the Black Arms fighting with the Iblis creatures similar to how Factions was fighting Shadow the Hedgehog. Since this game feels more comfortable acknowledging past games, how about Pirate Storm and Flying Battery, creating a unique dichotomy between the sky and sea sections being both bridged together by the ships in both sections. I could go on, there's so much potential this idea has, but instead they chose to fall back on the most basic, uninteresting way of using nostalgia, in a way that hasn't hit without a caveat since generations. On top of that, they even decided to reuse level designs from previous stages, and look, if you want to represent Sonic's memories through level themes, that's fine, even if they did it in the worst way possible, but reusing level design is inexcusable. It's mainly Adventure 2 and Generations, and I guess playing the adventure levels in the boost formula makes it more interesting, but that's all I can give it. Green Forest, Skyrail, Metal Harbor, Green Hill, Chemical Plant, even Windmill Isle Act 1 for some reason, had all their level designs reused for this game. Also, the memory excuse doesn't even check out for one of these because Sonic shouldn't know what Skyrail is. The part I hate is that them being restricted to these 4 level themes strips back their identity, and in the case of stages like Metal Harbor, I couldn't even tell that it was the level at first because cool set pieces like the rocket and the fact that, again, I'm looking at Chemical Plant makes it feel like a shallow imitation of the level it's taking from. There's original levels here, and some of them feel fun, but just like the redone levels, they lack identity, and since I know there are redone levels, in the back of my mind, I'm always wondering if these stages are actually reruns I can't remember at the moment, because everything looks the same. I don't mind the levels being short, since taking you out of the open world for 3 to 5 minute levels would have been a bit much, especially with how many of them there are, but if we're gonna have these smaller levels, why not put in the work to polish them a bit more? Anyway, each cyberspace level has 4 challenges: completing the stage, gaining S rank, getting a certain amount of rings, and getting all the red rings. Each challenge you complete gets you these vault keys I'll talk about later, and I like the way it was set up, because here you have the choice. Do you want to do a few cyberspace levels but complete all their challenges, or do you want to do a lot but not have to worry about specifically focusing on challenges? I actually had a fun time going through all these for their red rings. Granted, they aren't hitting as well as in the previous games due to the levels being a lot smaller, but I still enjoyed myself. Although you're almost guaranteed to get 2 keys each time you play these because the game hands out S ranks as frequently as Generations and Forces do, the time you need to fulfill is always extremely easy. I went through the infamous 1-2 and thought the hard S-rank times would be a constant through the game, which made me pretty excited honestly, but no, that is an exception, not the rule. On top of that, I'm half sure 1-2 is hard because of the control instead of the actual level, particularly the fact that jumping kills your speed really messes with some of the shortcuts you're supposed to take. Either way, since the time is so hard for no reason, it makes me think they accidentally made the S-rank time like 30 seconds shorter than it was meant to be. I'm gonna rant about this stage for a little bit, cause good god. In a weird, roundabout way, the worst control made for fun experimentation, as I had to do things like avoid springs cause jumping slowed me down, jump through grind rail loops to compensate for lost time, save my air boost for certain times cause I need to do a full landing to get it back. It was a fun experience, I can't lie, but I sure as hell don't want to give them any points for this, cause it is experimentation caused by limitation. If I could do this with the control of literally any other boost game, it would be easy. Honestly, I thought the really short levels would have meant the main incentive for these would be a speed run through them, but I hit the ceiling on my first or second run with that S-rank time, so I'm not really incentivized to tighten up my runs. That being said, there is one unintended trick that makes these cyberspace levels a lot more fun. That being, if you homing attack and then boost before connecting with your target, you'll be sent flying and it feels great. It made me look at these stages differently, seeing how I could chain flying through the stage, and yeah, it made things pretty fun actually. I don't know if I can compliment them on that because it feels like a glitch, but at the same time in those speed strats videos they've been making, they specifically mention the technique as something you can do to shave time, so at the same time, it's fun that they're leaning into these sort of fringe tricks. That's it for cyberspace though. I know I was really negative and have been for a lot of the video so far, but honestly I'm just working my way through the stuff I don't like, and cyberspace is quite honestly the worst part of the game. It's not even close. So it's all uphill from here, because now we get to talk about the islands themselves. So welcome to our first location, Kronos Island. I want to highlight this opening area, which is your introduction to the island and the entire game, basically outlining how everything here works. Once you get out of Green Hill, you find out that that was the first cyberspace stage. You get a small area to run around in that also shows you how secrets can be hidden to take you to different areas. Not long after, you get an encounter with your first mini-boss to show you the combat, and then you get a slightly larger area that also shows you the small platforming challenges the islands will be littered with. In the first 10 or so minutes of the game, they properly communicate what you can expect, the type of things you'll see, and what you'll be doing going forward by showing you what the game's made out of, which makes it so sad that these text boxes pop up so often, when I think without them, it would have been such a good and natural way of showing you how everything works. Either way, we get through here and get our first look at the open world, and what a good introduction. While Forces was the first Sonic game to make use of the hardware past the 7th generation of consoles, it still felt like it lagged behind games released before it. Meanwhile, Frontiers feels like it wants to up the graphical presentation, and yeah, the game for the most part looks really nice actually, and the open world environments are really the highlights. After some running around, we finally find our first friend Amy, that was a lot of F-words, who's gotten herself trapped in cyberspace. Not too long after, we can save her from this orb prison thingy, and freeing her gives Sonic some unfortunate effects on his arm, like he's gonna glitch out of reality or something. And after a bit of talking, Sonic gets moving to find more Chaos Emeralds and eventually find the rest of his friends. So what do you do in this open world? Well, there's two main processes going on here. Firstly, you can find memory tokens around the world in these little mini-challenges, or you can use your Psy-loop to circle these signs that give you a decent amount. These let you save your friends, which allows you to progress their stories to get 2 Chaos Emeralds. The other process is getting portal gears from beating these mini-bosses. The gears let you do cyberspace levels, which give you keys, and after collecting a certain amount of keys, you can unlock the other 4 Chaos Emeralds. After doing both of these, you can fight the Titan of this island, get the last Chaos Emerald it's guarding, and go supersonic to kill them. This is the general outline of how your trip through the islands will go, so let's start with the latter of the two processes. The mini-bosses here are the main portions where you'll be doing your combat, and I think they make a pretty good introduction. Ninja has fast swings and lets you see how you can quickly get in hits and make dodges. Tower has you dodge attacks while waiting for a weak point, although with some creativity you can get through the fight quicker. Ashura is pretty fun. My only gripe is that climbing up could sometimes be a bit jank, but I like going up 3 times to break his parts, and I also really like how you can Psy-loop his feet and then hit the underside to get a few free portal gears. The only one I don't really get down with is Squid. His fight isn't that great since it's mostly just chasing after him, which takes way too long, and if you don't kill him when you eventually get over there, then you gotta do it all over again. The worst part is probably when I'm trying to ignore him and he pops up near me, cause no matter where I am, the game thinks I'm fighting him and the boss music won't go away, and now I can't open my map either. Now, for saving your friends, memory tokens are scattered all across the map and can be gotten by doing these kinda mini challenges, you could say. You have to collect an escalating amount to progress the story, which eventually leads into a story-related minigame where you get a Chaos Emerald. These mini-challenges on Kronos are fine, I guess. My problem is that they rely too much on springs, dash panels, rings, and homing attack chains that can get as frequent as Sonic 4 at times. They also cause problems visually since they are subject to a lot of pop-in, which is very annoying and makes it to where a lot of the vantage points only show you most of the stuff in the area, since everything else is way too far away for the camera to handle. It would look a little less jarring if they at least made stuff fade in instead of just appearing like a lot of other games do, so I really hope this gets patched in the future. Visually, they aren't that exciting either. I wish they were more built into the design of the islands instead of being these stagnant floating platforms that pop in and out of reality more frequently than you'll actually be interacting with them. It's all about that immersion, because these platforms kind of break it and make it feel like a Mario Maker level, dropping in objects where they would best go. Making them more closely themed and connected to the islands themselves would make them feel less out of place and make the presentation a lot more cohesive. While most of the time you'll be collecting memory tokens, you'll occasionally also find other collectibles like 2 flavors of seeds and these little Koco guys that were introduced in this game. These little dudes inhabit the area and I really like them. They're like rock chow basically, and I don't know, I just think they're funny looking. You can give them to this Elder Koco, which lets you upgrade speed and ring capacity. I don't know why you ever increase the ring capacity, because it just makes it take more rings for you to go into your super fast mode. Meanwhile, speed is more useful, but at the same time, the speed increase you get is really small and you probably won't notice it unless you go up a bunch of levels at once. Oh yeah, also you can only upgrade this one at a time, which leaves me sitting here like, yeah, this is what I'm spending my time on. What makes this even worse is that there's a different Koco you give the seeds to that you can upgrade your attack and defense with, and this guy lets you upgrade everything at once, so I feel ill. There is a small visual thing from this I like though, and it's how the more Kocos you collect, the more of them show up in front of you when you stand still for a bit. It makes for an easy way to gauge how many of them you have, and I just like seeing them around from time to time. On the occasion, it's nice to sit down and admire the scenery with your little dudes. Finally, there are these red signs scattered across the world. See, when you first drop in, your map is completely empty and you need to mess around with these signs to open more squares on it. Honestly, it kind of reminds me of the way the map works in Hollow Knight of all things, except obviously it's a lot more laid back here, because I can be everywhere at once and all the enemies in Hollow Knight have a gun to my head. Each sign makes you complete this small mini-game that isn't anything special, and for the most part complete themselves, especially in this island. There are some I like the time trials and these dumb squares that I started getting bad at by the end of this game, yes, I'm ashamed, but equally you have ones like the quick step from side to side, or literally just to run for a bit. At the same time, I cut them a bit of slack because they don't really feel like they're meant to be an important part of the game, and they're more means to an end. For the most part, the important bit isn't the challenge, and instead is getting more of your map uncovered. Compare this to the memory token challenges that do feel like an integral part of the game, which is why I debate them more. I wish the minigames were more fleshed out, but I can't bring myself to care too much, you know? Additionally, completing the minigames makes these grind rails spawn, which act as a quick way of getting from place to place, and I really like this. By the time you've completed a good deal of signs, you'll find a bunch of grind rails connecting from place to place, which only compounds on the fun you can have launching off rails. I'm going to talk about this more as we go, but just an example on this island, there's a cyberspace stage all the way on that island over there, and how do you get over there? I have no clue, but I do know how to do it my way. I jumped over this grind rail, boosted on it, and launched off and actually reached it. Now that feels amazing to do. That's all the general game stuff out of the way, so now I get to talk about Kronos Island itself. It's expansive enough to complement your speed, but not too big so it's able to ease you in. Plus, there's a lot of landmarks to distinguish each area. There's the main tutorial place that's mostly a straight line and is behind a gate. There's the tower to the right of the map, the mechanical parts to the north, the giant spiderweb structure to the left, and then a river and forest to the bottom middle. I genuinely really like this place. It's pretty large, but still hits you with interesting areas, so it doesn't feel like I'm in a large grassy purgatory. As we work through here, we get to interact more with Amy, which I'm really happy about. Honestly, this is the most I've cared about her character since, I don't know, Unleashed, I want to say. Hell, before that it was Heroes. She's had it rough this past decade and a half. Also, the setup makes me really happy because if you recall in the last video, I mentioned how I wanted a more focused character roster that's more centered on character interaction, which is what it seems like Frontiers is aiming for. I'm also happy she's the first character you meet because she bounces off the new character for this game, that being Sage. She's an AI. See, we soon find out Eggman got himself trapped in cyberspace and intends on having Sage get him out. She's basically the analytical type for the time being, but we'll see that grow as things progress. We first have a run-in with her alongside this gigantic robot, which is one of the aforementioned Titans. She tells Sonic to piss off, with him basically telling her, "Neat, but I don't see your name on the box," and runs in like a dumbass. I love this cutscene because it actually displays a clear and dangerous threat. This thing throttles Sonic through 2 pillars, and he's totaled for a little. They actually try and build this thing up as a problem, and do it clearly by having him chuck the hedgehog like a baseball. That's awesome. After a bit, Amy encounters a Koco who's lost her children and another who's missing their love. And one part of Amy's character I like is that her whole crush on Sonic kind of takes a backseat here. While it's a big piece of her character and something you can't really do without concerning her, it's looked past in favor of other facets of her personality, which I think works well, cause to get ahead of myself here, Frontiers really likes to highlight the growth of the characters around Sonic. Here we see her independence, willingness to help others, and kindness towards people she just met shining through. And another part to this story is showing how Sonic has helped aid the growth of everyone else, which is why it's interesting to see Amy display some traits that he has as well. Honestly, it makes the story here the best continuation of her character arc they tried to give her in Adventure 1. After a while, we find the Koco's children, where they actually straight up die afterward. Now, this won't be explained until later, but yeah, that was a bit of a shock to the system. There's actually a minor conflict that occurs where Sonic wants to give up on helping the Koco and get a move on so he can save his friends, while Amy wants to stay behind and help as many people as possible. I think it was a nice little moment, especially in giving Amy some added depth in how her priorities for helping people are different from Sonic's, though I wish it was discussed a little longer instead of being solved and forgotten about in one cutscene. After some walking around, we even get glimpses into the past. My first thought seeing these things was, oh shit, chaos? Well, no, at least not completely. We have no clue what happened here, but these two actually get eviscerated by an explosion, and when we snap back to reality, the Koco finally found their lost love, so we'll be sure to wrap back around to this later. But hey, we finally got all those Chaos Emeralds, so let's go beat up that Titan, eh? Okay, give me like half an hour. This puzzle is really weird and I hate it, and even when I figure it out, it feels like luck. I don't even know why this thing is here, because it seems like a puzzle you can find in the late game, but after this, it never shows up again. It's just a pace breaker. Okay, so now we get to fight the Titan. He actually has the last Chaos Emerald on him, so you gotta climb your way up to start the onslaught. Now, nothing's perfect, so I'll air my qualms. Firstly, if you don't stock up on rings before going super, then you're basically screwed, because then the time limit will be really strict, and when you die and respawn, you'll have to grind out for rings for a little bit. That's kind of annoying. And secondly, especially for this first fight, it could be argued these battles are more style over substance, with you mostly just beating their ass. Yup, that's it. Dude, these bosses are so cool. Everyone said it, but I'll say it too. Every boss in this game feels like it could be the final one in any other Sonic game, and it makes Super Sonic feel so cool again. The last game to truly make Super Sonic feel like a force of nature was Unleashed, but man, you can really feel the raw power as he just manhandles these things. And God, that music! I love the contrast between this quiet, almost somber mood in the islands. You're walking calmly, talking to your friends, getting help from the Koco, solving some simple puzzles. Meanwhile, the bosses come in and boom! Earth-shattering soundtrack. Metal playing, throwing this thing into a mountain, deflecting that Beyblade back at him, blasting away lasers. Die, bitch! Fucking die!
Yo, dipshit!
Huh? What?
Excuse me, I got a little crazy there. The boss fights are probably the coolest part of this game. Every one of them is memorable in their own way, and again, that music, holy shit. When I first heard Live and Learn, it was kind of like a gateway to enjoying rock music, and as I got older, that interest developed into growing to like some metal music as well. So when I got to that first boss and heard the music in the background, it was absolutely insane to me. It was almost as if the Sonic music grew with me, which is an amazing feeling. The fight itself is a pretty good introduction too, if a little jank at parts. It's basically a combination of wailing on him while waiting for his attacks so you can parry them and unleash this super move. After you get his health bar down halfway, you gotta deal with his laser QTE. It's relatively simple, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't enjoying myself and smiling like a dumbass the whole way through. We break the robot, but unfortunately Amy's still trapped in cyberspace, so it looks like we gotta go wreck all of them until we're in the clear. So we decide to not waste any time time and speed over to the next island. Now, thankfully, since we're supersonic, blitzing this one should probably be easy. Okay, never mind. Yeah, so it turns out we're gonna have these things ejected from our body each time we drop into a new island. Since these all-powerful vitamin gummies are not our friend, they decide to scatter if they're taking out of us for 5 seconds. Ares Island is our next stop, and this one is also solid, albeit with a few, quirks, let's call them. It's a 2-for-1 combo, being a desert and a canyon, which I really like the split between, as you can do a lot of running around and island exploration in the desert portions. Meanwhile, the canyons contain a lot of platforming obstacles, which is pretty fun. The only sour spot with the island design is that I feel like the whole thing is split into 2 chunks that are sectioned off from each other, so it makes transitioning from one chunk to the next a bit annoying. Speaking of annoying, there are a few minor annoyances I have with this map too, which mainly surround the enemies. These umbrella guys just suck, not when you have to fight them, then I think they're actually kind of fun. No, it's when you want to get a move on, because then the entire camera shifts to focus on them, and it's just like, I want to keep moving, stop that. Next, the mini-bosses. I actually really like having to hit sumo into the electric parts of the barrier, and having to time your hits on tank when you're in the sandstorm, but the other two are not great. Strider has basically the same problem Ghost does, where if you don't kill him when you get your chance, you have to do this whole song and dance with the grind rails again. And sometimes his legs like to really block your view as one of the fireballs is going by. Shark, meanwhile, is just really boring. Same problem of needing to hit him when you get your chance, but at least with Ghost and Strider, it felt like I was interacting with something. Meanwhile, Shark is just left, up, down, right. Yeah, not exactly the most titillating gameplay experience. I would also like to take this time to discuss some quirks I have with running and the boost in this game, which is basically the cue that I'm gonna get into some nitpicky stuff. First, the run. While in pretty much every other Sonic game you have a gradual progression from no speed to running, here moving around instantly puts you into your max run speed, and I mean max run speed since it's completely unaffected by the terrain. This means you're locked to the speed at all times, and it also means that faster speeds are locked behind the boost, which I guess makes precision platforming easier but doesn't feel as natural. Previously, the boost was simply a tool to get yourself up to max speed quickly and let you blast through everything provided you managed it well. Sure, it gave you a bit of a boost to your speed, but you were still able to attain a fast speed without it, which felt a lot better. Additionally, the boost feels a lot slower than average. I'd even go as far compared to the run button from Lost World, which only makes it more annoying that it has a stamina gauge. Imagine if every few seconds in Lost World you had to stop holding the run button to let the meter refill. It's a real pace breaker. This is also why I always make sure my ring capacity is full, because then it actually makes me feel fast, which, again, bit of a pace breaker having to run in circles to get rings if I ever get hit. I wanted to mention this now, because you can really feel the boost speed being reduced with how large the land is on this island. This is also around where I interacted with some gameplay features for the first time, those being fishing and the star showers. On each island there's a cyberspace portal that instead takes you to one of Big's fishing lakes, and I really like how it was done here. You can give him a couple of these purple coins to fish, and depending on how good your pull is, you can get varying quantities of tokens. Sometimes you can even get some other stuff, notably these passes that let you buy an item without spending tokens, usually best reserved for the expensive ones, and these scrolls that let you fast travel to Elder and Hermit Cocos. They also added this cooking minigame. It was a collab with Monster Hunter. You can get items from it, but I suck for some reason, so I never do this. Star showers are an event that can happen during the nighttime at random to help you get a good deal of purple coins, and I do not like these. First off, it isn't explained well, which at first made me think you just need to collect a bunch of these not star bits, but no, here's how it works. Each star lets you spin this slot machine, which can obviously net you a lot of coins, except the game never clarifies that you can manually stop the slots, and I didn't even know about it until I scrolled through the control config. And yeah, it's binded to up on the D-pad for some reason. Even despite that, I still don't care for it, because all these beacons in in the sky really clutter up the presentation and can make it hard to tell which one of these glowing beacons is the map marker you have active. Aside from that, I want to talk about the previously mentioned Monster Hunter collab, because it's part of a bunch of cosmetics you can get. I'm not a fan of how the cosmetics in this game feel like a complete afterthought, since you can't earn any in-game, they're all obtained through DLC, and you need to back out all the way to the main menu to change which one you're using. There's this Adventurer set you get from the Digital Deluxe Edition, which I obviously picked up. It comes with a nice digital art book, but for some reason gives you more collectibles for the first island, which I don't get. If I'm paying for a game's special edition, why would I want stuff to get through the game faster? There's two different types of Rathalos armor from Monster Hunter. I'm a big fan of the full armor. It kind of reminds me of Excalibur Sonic from Black Knight. Around Christmas, they gave us this Santa costume, which is neat, but the final and best one is the SA2 soap shoes, baby! You could only get this by signing up for their newsletter during a certain period, but guys, why are these not available for everyone? Even if it was like $1 or something. One of the social media managers said on Twitter there are no plans at the moment to re-release them again. And come on, these things literally would print money. Hoping they make them available again after this like they did for the special edition content in Colors Ultimate. As it stands, once I equipped these, I pretty much never took them off. On to the actual story content of this island, and our character to rescue is Knuckles, continuing off his side story. I really like the dynamic between Sonic and Knuckles here. They're constantly going between friends trying to show each other up or fuck with the other, Sonic trying to help out Knuckles, leading to a lot of bro moments I enjoyed, and them doing the gayest shit I have ever seen in my life. Much like Amy, this is the best their dynamic has been in a long while, and they do a good job of naturally showing all the important facets of their interactions, including the last part, especially the last part. This is also a good point to mention. I like what they've done with the animation and cutscenes here. The characters feel more expressive, they move around more. It feels like I'm watching two characters interact instead of two planks of wood exchanging dialogue. I still think there's a good ways left to go, and part of me thinks a straight upgrade of models for the whole cast is probably the best option, especially after seeing a few episodes of Sonic Prime, which I thought had pretty good animation. But regardless, it's a good step forward. The only exception are some cutscenes that have the characters standing there, nothing happening, just people talking, which is really lame. We travel through Ares with Knuckles for a while, and I like how his knowledge on Angel Island helps us learn more about the ruins here. We eventually learn how the ruins are similar to those on Angel Island, but actually predate them, meaning they must have been built way before the Echidna tribe was even a thing. After a while, Knuckles finds this group of Koco soldiers he wants to help, and after solving their predicament, they die in the same way the ones Amy was trying to help did. And this is also where it starts becoming more explicit in the connection between the Kocos and these ancients that Eggman mentioned at the beginning of the game. I like how the connection between them is a little vague, which lets you interpret things your own way, so here's how I see it. The Kocos represent the spirits of the ancients, which is why in all the flashbacks they appear inside of them as more ghostly. Meanwhile, the rock body of the Kocos we see in the present are kind of like how in some forms of media, ghosts still manifest themselves because they have some unfinished business. The rock form is them still trying to finish the goal they had before they died. That brings me to this symbol. It was first shown in the teaser trailer and it appears in the sky each time a Koco fulfills its job and passes on. In my first playthrough I did before my replay for this video, I remember being a little upset we never exactly found out what the deal was with the symbol, but the game actually does tell you about this. It's just pretty subtle, and I mean, can you blame me for not picking up on it? With the past few years of Sonic plot, subtlety was the last thing I expected. I think the symbol has multiple meanings. Firstly, for the most likely scenario, it represents passing on. The spirit of the Koco is freed, and the symbol appearing shows them passing into the afterlife after feeling complete once you help them. Now for the hyper version. I think the symbol has two distinct meanings at the same time, one literal and one metaphorical. For the former, the literal meaning is that it's the symbol of the ancients and it's the reason why they can continue to live on as this representation of their spirit until they feel like they've done what they need to do. The metaphorical meaning has to do with purpose. The ancients you find as Koco are the ones who had a purpose they never got to fulfill, and now they wander after their death desperately trying to complete it. That is, until Sonic and friends show up, help them with what they need to do, and now they're done with their purpose and die peacefully. Now, this could be right or not right, I don't know, but just keep that in your back pocket for later, because the reason I like my version is how it explains something that happens once the game is done. After a while of running around, Knuckles finds some ruins that remind him of Angel Island, which plants the seeds that the Ancients and the Echidnas are related in some way. This leads to some introspection in him, thinking that the Koco probably facing events similar to the Eradication and the Echidnas, we'll get there later, and him being upset about being the last of his kind. This is another way the thread of Sonic having an effect on his friends gets continued, this time having his sense of freedom rub off on Knuckles, with him wanting a little leeway in his duties of guarding the Master Emerald to get out there and live life more. Similar to Amy, it also serves as a surprisingly good continuation of his arc from Adventure 1. It makes more sense if you look at it as consecutive events that happen one by one instead of acknowledging the gap in time. Knuckles wondering why he's destined to guard the Emerald forever, with him realizing he's pretty much meant to do it in Adventure 1, perfectly segues into his want to explore areas outside of his island in this game. It's really cool we're finally having these plot beats from a while ago expanded upon, but also makes it weird that it took this long in the first place. Now after that fun time, who's ready for a pointless minigame? Why do I have to do this? I mean, it serves no purpose since it practically beats itself and all it does is open a door that has no reason to be closed off in the first place. Also, I don't know what it is, but the depth perception on this is real wacky. Man, I'm really going 2 for 2 on shitty crane gimmicks in games recently. After the crane, we get this mini platforming section, and Island 2 starts integrating a lot more of these. In particular, having a whole section of islands you need to get to through traversing an underground obstacle course, which is cool. These kinda just make me realize that the cyberspace stages are extremely unneeded and retroactively makes them worse, just cause it proves they could have made traditional Sonic level design work in the islands themselves, and now I don't even have to grapple with shittier controls. I will say though, this does highlight the fact that a lot of these challenges in the open world just have you being flung around by springs and dash pads and whatever. Especially in an open world type of game, I want to move around, I want to be free, I want to do cool movement things and feel like I did a cool movement thing instead of being the puppet on strings that the game dragged over to this area. Although, again, being able to do these cool movement things requires a lot of fundamental parts of the movement in this game to be redone, which is the problem with a lot of high-speed momentum stuff in this game, so bleh. Basically what I'm saying is that if the game I just described in this paragraph of my script sounds good to you, play Solar Ash. This is non-negotiable, a great game. Now we get to fight Wyvern, which is a really good boss fight, assuming you don't know about one of the quirks of this game. See, this game has a parry. It's pretty good, feels satisfying to use, knocks the opponent off balance, and slows down time for you getting a lot of damage. There's just one fatal flaw: the parry is not timing based. Yeah, you can just hold that down for as long as you like and reap the benefits. It's no risk, all reward, and while it neuters the regular enemy encounters, it completely decimates this boss fight. On my first playthrough, I actually struggled with this one since back when I did the first run, I thought the parry was timing based, and the whole boss is about parrying his attacks. It became this really fun test of timing and reflexes to make sure you don't get blown back. Once I figured out how the parry worked and came back for round 2, it damn near beats itself. Missiles that would usually reward good timing and being perceptive with a shortcut to the boss are now guarantee routes that take no skill. Blocking the boss now contains no challenge since you can hold down 2 buttons and win. It is genuinely sad. It baffles me the parry is even like this, to where I wonder if this is a mistake, and if so I really hope they can fix it, because it takes all the urgency away from every fight, knowing that at any time I could just sit there and wait for them to activate my slow down time and win mode. On a more positive note though, while it is one of the weaker bosses, it's probably one of the best for the spectacle. Sonic absolutely manhandles this thing, throws it into a mountain, guides its own missiles into itself for the killing blow. It's not a great fight, but it's at least cool to watch. Either way, parry is as parry does, and we basically wait for the thing to kill itself. One thing I like that a lot of other people have pointed out is Sonic backing up when Knuckles does a friendly punch at him, possibly being a reference to him being able to hit the emeralds out of him like in Sonic 3. But that also brings up the question of, can Sonic's friends go through him or not? It's pretty inconsistent through the whole game and doesn't really matter, but it got me thinking about it. Man, editing this montage sucks. Why is like everything in this island in 2D? It's not cool looking. Don't worry guys, we'll dodge the lasers for sure this time. Or not. Now, Chaos Island is unfortunately where a lot of the cracks start showing. Before we get into this island, though, I want to sidestep back over to some fishing, because this will be important later. There's one item that you can only get through fishing. These are the Eggman memos, and I absolutely love these. Not only does it contribute to the lore building of the Starfall Islands that this game introduces, but it also helps enhance the cohesive lore that Frontiers feels like it's trying to put back together. But the thing is, the memos are available to get from fishing as soon as you start, which is not the best, since if you read them as early as possible, you end up spoiling a few things for yourself, mainly the ancients. As such, I usually save them for when I'm in the middle of going through Island 2. I thought it'd just work best for me to talk about them now. So first for the stuff that works with what we know. The ancients are older than any type of civilization that have been in Sonic so far. Also, this memo mentions the Black Arms. Didn't see that one coming. Next, the ancients got wiped out by something. It's not entirely clear. All we know is that they tried to rebuild after it, but got completely destroyed shortly after trying to reform. It's also interesting for it to clarify some extremely random stuff from previous games, like Eggman taking up the Eggman name specifically to spite Sonic for making fun of him with it, and that Team Sonic Racing is in fact canon for some godforsaken reason. Next, let's make the Sega racing games canon, because the heavy existing in the Sonic universe would be funny, I think. I also like the more casual tone these have. It's nice to see Eggman just commentating on his surroundings and even on Sonic's friends. Would have been nice to hear him say stuff about some of the friends that aren't on these islands, mainly interested to hear what he thinks of Shadow, and even the Chaotix after the whole ordeal he had with them in Heroes, but still, I really liked it. Finally though, there's the important thing that I'll talk more about later. So the whole game we would sometimes randomly cut to Eggman and Sage interacting in cyberspace, leading to a good deal of interactions that allow the seeds to be planted for Sage's growth, particularly when she regards Orbot and Cubot as her brothers. Meanwhile, in the Egg memos, we hear Eggman start to grow a fondness for Sage, starting the game seeing her as just a computer program to help him with the evil scheme of today, but eventually seeing her as a daughter figure. He even goes as far to wonder if she was anything like his cousin Maria, which, gonna be honest, hearing Eggman mention Maria just brings up more questions than answers at this point, but no, it's fine, whatever, don't worry about it. Either way, it's a surprising development that after all this time serves to add some character to Eggman, which is interesting, but we're gonna call timeout on this discussion, but don't worry, we'll get back to that. Though I did mention some cracks in the gameplay department, I will say that I enjoyed myself on Kronos and Ares, but Chaos really just devolves and it's not the best. The structure of this island kinda reminds me of Alpine Skyline from A Hat in Time, if you played that, and if you haven't, then stop wasting my time and leave. There's one big center area connected to a few smaller islands. The problem with this is that they're usually connected by like one grind rail, and you gotta hope that rail is in plain sight, cause sometimes they like to hide them in the back of the island, which leads to me running around everywhere like an idiot. A strategy that a lot of other people have mentioned has been deflecting this bird's laser back into it so you can hitch a ride and glide to the other areas, making things a lot easier, and I will say, it's pretty fun to do, and it feels like one of those cool things I mentioned earlier. This island also shows the worst of this game's design for challenges in the open world. Okay, so usually these signs you would Psyloop around and get a miscellaneous item, usually memory tokens. Well, from here onward, a lot of the time when you loop a sign, you'll be met with a spring or a dash pad, which is so lame and deflating, especially when I came here because I'm looking for tokens. Furthermore, why do we even have to have dash panels in the open world? I get things like rails, springs, and areas where the camera's fixed as a way of getting you around and giving you a better perspective, but dash pads serve even less purpose in this setting than they already did in the standard Sonic games. Speaking of fixed camera sections, you know what also flies in the face of open world design? 2D sections. Why? 2D sections are a blight on the open world in multiple respects. There were a couple in the previous islands, but they weren't spammed like they are here, and usually were paired with a gimmick that will only work properly in 2D. Here though, it feels like almost every challenge you run into is a 2D section, and it's so annoying because if you run into one, you're now locked into the 2D plane and can't escape from it unless you either complete the challenge or find a way to jump out. The worst case is probably getting to the top of this large structure where there's so much space to run around in, but for God knows what reason, you're stuck to 2D. I've actually created a little mini challenge here to skip hitting important objects to progress to avoid getting stuck in 2D while still making my way to the top, and I mean, hey, it's fun, but again, fun created out of breaking the game's rules, so again, no added points from me. Having 2D in the open world also completely breaks some challenges, like when you're supposed to run down into this cave area you opened, there's this giant section here you're supposed to do in 2D. The thing is, the trigger to go into it only activates when you hit these dash pads, meaning you can easily walk around and now you can just run through everything. I mean, yeah, sure, I could go do it the normal way, but why would I want to play a 2D section I don't even like anyway? Oh yeah, also keeping with the theme of things falling apart, cause I didn't know where else to slot this in, shout out to this one random mountain that for some reason has a hole in it, and you can just play around inside the thing. Look at this poor bastard, he doesn't know what's happening. Island 3 is also where I start noticing a problem with the combat moves interacting with your platforming. What I'm talking about mainly involves the move Homing Shot, which is activated by pressing right trigger and then X. This means if I want to boost into a homing attack, sometimes I accidentally attack the enemy, which messes up the flow, especially if it's in a homing attack chain. Around this time in the game is also when you'll max out the skill tree, and you actually get some pretty cool stuff at this point. The aforementioned Homing Shot comes to mind, being a really hard hitter. Also, like, I doubt it, but in the crossover Sonic had with Mega Man in the comics, he also has a move called the Homing Shot that looks pretty similar, so like, this isn't a reference because I doubt they would want to touch Archie Sonic with a 10-foot pole at this point, just more of a neat coincidence I noticed. A lot of moves you get at this point work as replacements for ones you got earlier on. The Loop Kick is a better Stomp attack, Cross Slash is a better Sonic Boom, and Spin Slash is a better Cyclone Kick. Also, the Spin Slash name is probably a Sonic Extreme reference, which I'd actually buy as being intentional. There is one last move that I didn't unlock until later, mainly because I was bad about getting the skill points this go around, but I will say, you being likely to complete the entire skill tree by only the third island disincentivizes doing extra stuff for skill points way earlier than it probably should. Once you've unlocked everything you need, there's basically no reason for you to fight normal enemy encounters, do tricks, and yeah, you'll still be circling these signs for other collectibles, but now if they have skill points, it's basically a sign wasted. Finally, for mini-bosses, and they're just kind of devolving the same way the island design itself is, because Shinobi and Excavator are just Ninja and Tower again, but with like one extra move each, and they didn't even bother for Squid, they just ripped him out of his natural habitat and now he's confused and afraid. Spider is alright, just again has the problem of you being out of luck if you don't kill it when you get the chance, although I do find the process of skydiving towards it while going through the rings to be pretty fun. Fortress makes me wonder why Squid is even here, because in some respects it's a hard mode version of him, while changing up enough to not only stand on its own, but actually be a much more engaging fight, even if it takes a bit to get to him. Finally, there's the story for this island, which definitely has the most to go through compared to the others. Tails is the one we gotta help here, and freeing him has Sonic be the most corrupted he's been yet. And I actually like how you can see that his idle animation changes to have him having a really bad headache. Come on, you could have done more than that. I like the added bit of characterization where Sonic plays off him catching a computer virus after freeing Tails, but stops trying to hide how much pain he's in the second Tails runs off. It's a small thing that adds a surprising amount of depth. Oh, also you have this small run-in with the Titan of this island, which also happened in the second island too, but this one stands out because I laughed my ass off seeing Squid get wrecked by his giant flying shield. We meet back up with Tails after some time and see another flashback showing the island getting bombarded by something or another. I don't know if they ran out of budget here though, which is something we'll get back to, but for some reason this cutscene plays out as a fancy slideshow rather than something in-engine like every other flashback, so that's kind of weird. Plus, Tails saying the attack was on par with Dark Gaia is exactly what I mean about the callbacks being a bit forced at times, cause not only is it a weird line to randomly belt out, but also it's just blatantly wrong considering destroying these few islands was a full-on assault, meanwhile Dark Gaia was a being that was constantly in a cycle of destroying the entire planet with Light Gaia being there to fix it, and also exists one of the few Aggies capable of hurting Supersonic, which harnesses all the power of the Chaos Emerald's energy, that, just to remind you, having one of them possesses untold energy, and hell, Dark Gaia simply existing on Earth was causing it to become more broken, if not for Sonic putting it all back together again, so basically, this line's kinda dumb. Checkmate. Anyway, here's a pretty cool callback actually, one of the gray Death Egg robots from Forces being here, which actually just gives me a great idea for how Sonic's memories manifesting themselves as real locations here could have been done in a less nostalgia-pandering way. So what if on the island, starting on the first, you start seeing imagery from past stages, almost looking as if they suddenly showed up, with the appearances of this imagery ramping up the further you get through the game. This would be a cool way of representing Sonic's memories messing with this world, but also would let them make reference to memorable set pieces from past games. This whole idea is felt perfectly with this one robot, seeing as it looks as if it just got dropped in here randomly, with Eggman obviously not being around to put it here and it being stuck in the ground. Just a shame it's the only time it happens. Funny, my favorite callback was the Forces reference, go figure. Tails also lets us do this little hacking minigame that takes the form of a small shoot-'em-up. Honestly, this was one of my favorite minigames to play. I would have loved to do more of these. Why are we pausing? We eventually find another Koco looking to get parts to assemble a weapon to help them win their fight, and after some running around, I guess Tails starts feeling a little down, cause he starts saying some depressing stuff, which makes it all the weirder that we don't bring this up again for a while, and this plot point only matters later, which is only like 3 cutscenes later, but that's more game time than it sounds. Tails has a lot to unpack, and that's putting it lightly. See, he's worried that he's annoying to Sonic since whenever things get serious, he's about as useful as a vegan in a hot dog eating contest. This has Sonic rebuke that Tails has done some cool stuff like saving Station Square and rescuing Sonic from the Deadly Six for 5 seconds. Not the best example, but I get it. This leads to the kind of conflict this scene creates, and I don't mean character conflict, I mean narrative conflict.
I'm wildly inconsistent.
Hey, you said it, not me. Yeah, there's been a lot of contention about the portrayal of Tails in pretty much all the games post-Unleashed, cause he was either standing on the sidelines, being whiny and unnecessarily confrontational, or featuring in one of the worst scenes in the entire series. While Amy and Knuckles have been mostly out of the spotlight in recent days, letting them pick up where they left off with them, Tails has still been prominent, so the entirety of this island is basically the writers trying to gather everything he's done so far and make an attempt to put it in one neat little package. I will say, I do applaud them for being bold enough to go in that direction instead of just picking and choosing what's canon, cause that would have made things even more of a mess, but that means there are a few contradictory versions of Tails that you somehow gotta tie together. The solution they give is a bit weird, but I also feel it's probably one of the best routes they could have taken given the situation. The conclusion they come to is that Tails is growing up. It's naturally needs Sonic's help along the way, and he shouldn't beat himself up about it. It's a fine enough direction to take, and I can't think of a better way they could have done it, but it also still has a few holes in it. The most obvious one that comes to mind is that why do almost all of Tails' major bravery moments happen in the earlier games, where he'd be younger, and all the moments where he needs help are more recent? In fact, this is a big assumption, but part of me thinks the mention of his whole thing with fighting off the Deadly Six was deliberately added in there to make his accomplishments seem more spread out, when in reality it pales in comparison to some of his earlier feats. Nowhere else does the discrepancy show itself more than the infamous scene from Forces. Why could he beat more powerful versions of Chaos when he was more inexperienced, but he needs Sonic's help against the most basic form of him? Again, I respect them trying to smooth everything out, and I think they did the best they could, but under more scrutiny, it starts to fall apart a bit. Either way, I do like the conclusion it leads to, where Tails decides once this whole ordeal is over, he wants to try and go solo a bit and grow without Sonic, which I think is nice, and it could also lead perfectly into Tails Adventure 2, baby! Make it happen, Sega. Anyway, I don't exactly have a segue for this, but we kinda need to talk about Sage now. Yeah, new character for this game, and you'll notice I haven't really talked about her much, and that's more because I was saving it for now when it'd be most appropriate to get everything laid out at once. And also because the scene after Tails has his realization will require a lot of Sage talk. So pretty much entirely through the game, you keep having these mini run-ins with her. No fights or anything. Most that happens is Sonic being confused at why she refuses to tell him what the deal is, and then we proceed as normal. Over time, though, we slowly gather that she knows something is coming and doesn't find it important to tell anyone. Her reasoning is that at the start of the game, she deems it statistically impossible that anyone can do anything about it, but eventually she slightly warms up to Sonic and his friends, but still reasons that it's probably better for them to not know what's coming. What I like is in the middle of Chaos Island, she actually questions Tails directly on why he puts his faith in Sonic, with him rebuking that he's seen Sonic conquer the odds multiple times, unknowingly appealing to her more analytical way of seeing things. I actually really like their interaction here. I would have liked to see Sage interact with Sonic's friends more one-on-one, rather than always having Sonic as a mediator of sorts. On top of these, we also see the building father-daughter relationship between her and Eggman in the occasional cyberspace cutscenes. This comes to a head when Sonic and Tails have a total bro moment after Tails realizes he still has some growing up to do. And I'm gonna be honest, I hate how this is pretty much the climax of Sage's arc. Like, okay, she realizes that family can exist even if they aren't directly related, she's worried about the unknown cataclysm now that she has more insight into Sonic and Tails as people, that's fine, but what I don't like is how that segues into this corny as hell montage showing flashbacks to Eggman and Sage's time in cyberspace, featuring one of the worst songs I have ever heard. This whole thing becomes even funnier when one of the cutscenes that plays in the montage happened like 5 seconds ago, and half of the cutscenes are just the two of them standing around having menial conversations, cause the development hadn't happened yet. On top of that, if you didn't listen to the egg memos, this scene could come off as totally one-sided and seem like it's completely out of nowhere, cause a lot of this development only happens up front regarding Sage, and all the development from Eggman happens in this optional material. If they were gonna do this, they needed some of the memos to happen in actual cutscenes, cause without it, this whole thing seems extremely unnatural. Anyway, it's been a bit long since we had an unnecessarily required and annoying minigame, so how about another one? Pinball's been a thing in almost every Sonic game, whether it's a casino, carnival, gambling in the middle of a forest. Sonic and losing all your life savings go hand in hand. Just so happens, this is one of the worst instances of it. It's deceptively simple. You get the most basic of basic pinball tables, collect all the rings, get the red rings for a score multiplier, but it just doesn't work great. Sometimes the pinball has a gravitational pull to the holes on the sides, which is a problem because you gotta make those 3 balls count so that you can work your way up to the ridiculous 5 million point requirement. Get ready for the long haul too, because it doesn't matter how many point multipliers you get, because with this basic ass table, it's going to take you a while no matter what, and if your ball falls down, your multiplier is gone. Funny fun fact, I looked up Sonic Frontiers Pinball on Google, and one of the first autofill results was Pinball Skip, so that shows you how well liked this section is. On the bright side though, after we do this, now we can fight the best boss in the game, Knight. It definitely has the most going on and is my favorite for feeling the most like a fight instead of you just mercilessly pounding these things into the ground. Getting to the Chaos Emerald is a bit more of a challenge here too, since he loves spinning around and spawning these spikes from the ground. Once you get into the fight, he's hard to hit because he's a slippery little weasel and his sword looks really cool, but also gives him some pretty decent range in the already smaller than average arena. The fight gets really good once he's in his second phase, where you gotta glide down on his shield avoiding missiles, and once you get back to the fight, it's changed completely. The shield Beyblades around the arena, so now you gotta parry it and let it rip to hit him, which was pretty fun, and you even need to lead your shots occasionally. It finishes off with this awesome QTE where Sonic chops the Titan in half with his own sword, and God have I mentioned how cool the bosses are yet. This is easily my favorite in the entire game.
mind freak!
Was that transition abrupt? Yeah, unlike the other islands, we don't stop and talk to Tails before flying off, we just leave that explosion behind and head on to the next one. A bit weird. Sonic's looking a lot worse for wear when we drop in, and the voice says to deal with these towers. I like how you can see Sonic's having fun in the face of danger attitude is tested, because he says the same line here that he says in the beginning of the game to Amy, but once you get here, he repeats it and sounds a lot less sure of himself. Just as well, too, because Sonic's whole corruption deal is only getting worse, but we gotta deal with those towers first. Firstly, we got a bit of false advertising here. This ain't a fourth island, this is just these towers and then we're off to the final place. I'd talk about the budget running out here, but I want to save it for the next island. This place is so weird because it's easily the most undercooked and has the least going on, but at the same time it has the best platforming challenges and functions as a minor lore dump. I guess it makes the most out of the small amount it has, but that just makes me more confused on how I feel about it. To talk about the platforming, it's easily the most involved and fun in the game, but also confuses me in how it tries to take the leash off with all the automation via springs and dash pads, but why not do this for the entire game instead of starting when we're close to wrapping up? A lot of the obstacles you've seen from prior islands are put together to make them the best they can be, but I also wish we could have had this from the start, and it's almost a little jarring that now they want you to start trying, with you being punished by needing to do the climb over again. It particularly actually tries to use the climbable walls well instead of just having you be bounced through them. Most of what happens here is story related though, so let's just run through it. We start with the Ancients who fled their home planet after it was destroyed, and we also see them using the Chaos Emeralds as a source of power, which start having a reaction that leads them to the Master Emerald on Earth. They then try to re-establish themselves on the Starfall Islands from this game, and during their time on the islands they create cyberspace, capable of preserving the Ancients' thoughts and dreams inside of it, but unfortunately whatever destroyed their planet is back to finish the job. To fight against their assailant, they created the Titans, which would be powered by a Chaos Emerald each, where they presumably lose the fight, leading to the Titans' role in this game. Meanwhile, in the present day, each time Sonic unlocks a tower, his corruption is getting increasingly worse, leading to the last one, where he basically becomes a husk. In getting through the towers, he frees his friends from cyberspace, but it's kinda haunting. At least it would be if that conflict didn't get resolved in 5 seconds. Come on, man! This would have been so cool to either let Sonic's friends get in on the action, or have Sonic get a new form from this, but no. They just kinda get in a circle, and now we never talk about it again. It also turns out the voice in Sonic's head was actually the big bag villain that's now set free, and with Eggman out of cyberspace and the two willing to work together on Sage's suggestion, we're now scrambling to get the Chaos Emeralds and go fix this mess before the impending cataclysm. Before we sift on over the next island though, I want to do cleanup on story bits because we just got a lot dumped on us. Firstly, relating to the theory I had earlier and an interaction that happens in the next island up, Sage mentions that the Koco were created as good luck charms for the Ancients, which you'd think kills my thinking, but Sonic also mentions in that conversation that they seem pretty alive and it's not impossible that the Ancients changed them to contain memories, so I don't know, I think it could still work. Just figured I'd get that out of the way because I was expecting people to tell me if I didn't. Next up, in the Egg Memo, it's mentioned how the Ancients are relatives of Chaos, which since Chaos was related to the Chao, it's not impossible that the Ancients are related to the Chao as well. It's sort of implied by the game slightly that the Ancients that stayed with the Chaos Emeralds evolved into Chao, which has also become a bit of a dominant theory in the fandom. Personally, I like the Ancients becoming Chao just because that not only explains why they were loafing around the Master Emerald in SA1 for no reason, but also why the longest running defender of the Emeralds looks like the Ancients. I also want to talk about how some people don't like the Chaos Emeralds originating from the Ancients in space because it conflicts with the lore of Unleashed. I tend to disagree, actually. Although there's a lot of speculation you gotta do. First, Chip mentions how he and Dark Gaia were constantly looping and destroying and rebuilding the planet, which seems to imply that Light Gaia was able to do that completely on his own, and the Chaos Emeralds were sort of a contingency plan should he not be at full power, while serving the double function of repowering the Chaos Emeralds. In fact, in Unleashed, we never know exactly what created the Gaia Temples in the first place, and seeing as there's altars on the islands intended on harnessing the power of the emeralds, I don't think it's out of the question for the Gaia temples to have been created by the ancients when you think about it. Finally, the function cyberspace serves storing the ancients' memories to preserve them, probably because they knew they could be wiped out at any moment, was getting essentially cross-contaminated with Sonic's memories, which is why you have all this stuff around. Although, again, wasn't exactly interesting from a gameplay angle or even from a visual one. So yeah, pretty good deal to take in, but we're still not done yet because we got one island left to knock out, so let's get through it. Alright, first thing to tackle, which started in the last island and continues here. Yeah, the aesthetic for them is back to grass. This means out of the 5 islands, 3 share the grass theme, which is extremely lame, because it means visual variety is essentially down the drain. I'd buy it if they wanted the island theming to have you end where you began and it'd be poetic or some bullshit, but it doesn't feel like it when I can see the first island just out of my reach thanks to some invisible walls. It's no secret at this point that Kronos, Rhea, and Uranos islands were originally all combined into one that probably would have comprised the complete first island before the game fully came out, though whether it be due to constraints on budget or time, they were split into thirds, mostly to their detriment. I think Kronos got off the best of the 3, and before I found out about them being split off, I actually thought that one was complete. Rhea easily got it the worst, barely even qualifying as an island, and Uranos is a bit of a middle ground because it might have been better if it was complete, but it's alright as it stands. What I mainly find confusing is why make the game end at a split-off chunk of what was supposed to be the first island, instead of having things close off at Chaos Island where it would have felt a lot more appropriate. That being said, despite everything working against it, I actually do like this one. It's a lot more fun to run through than Chaos Island easily. It has a good deal of these large, sweeping landscapes I like, and the more frequent placement of large structures when usually other islands would have like 1 or 2 important landmarks. The challenges here somewhat restrain themselves from the automation the other islands had, but it definitely has more of it than the challenges on Rhea do, which is a damn shame. There's also a couple spots with these giant walls you can run on, which is neat, but also highlights how wall running as a mechanic has a lot of missed potential. Yeah, we're talking about this now. I know this has been a thing for a while in this game at this point, but I wanted to spread stuff out so I'm not spending 5 hours talking about Island 1. I'm surprised that out of all the mechanics they could have brought back for this game, the parkour system from Lost World wasn't up there, because being able to freely run around on walls and stuff in the open world would have been an amazing idea. Instead, to compensate for this, we have these specific walls that you can run on. Ignoring the fact that only being able to run on specific walls straight up sucks, they also don't feel the greatest. You can only boost across it if you run onto the wall while boosting. Running onto the wall without boosting and trying to do it afterward just makes you run normally, which is really annoying. I'm not really sure what they were going for with this system, considering it's just a pace breaker and nothing else. Honestly, there isn't that much to say about this one layout-wise. It keeps up basically the same trend from the islands before it, being pretty much a middle ground of all the prior 3. Keeps things more focused like Kronos, is larger and more complex like Ares, and has the problems of 2D and too many springs and dash pads from signs like in Chaos. The only unique problem it had was that, I know it's the end of the game, but I feel like the memory token requirements were a bit much here. It was the only time I actually fished around for them instead of collecting them like normal, which just made me more happy the option was there. One thing that happened here though was me getting the final move on the skill tree, the recovery smash. Now, another funny quirk of this game is that when you get hit, unlike every other Sonic game, you don't lose rings. It's not until you hit the floor after taking damage that you lose them. This means two things. Firstly, if you fall a far distance, you'll usually cancel the falling animation and won't take damage when you hit the ground. Secondly, with the recovery smash, it skips you hitting the ground, and all it takes is hitting A after getting hit to activate. This is basically a win the game button, since now if you get hit, you can mash A to ensure you never take damage. This only highlights how fights as it is have little urgency, because most games would have a health bar. Meanwhile, this still has the Sonic ring system, so having one of these things makes you unkillable, but that's been a bit of a minor problem through the whole game. The recovery smash, though, it's just too broken and snaps this game's combat in half, which is something you can already do pretty easily with just the parry. Finally, there's mini-bosses, and disappointingly, most of them are recycled again. There's only two new ones, Kunoichi and Master Ninja. They're just harder variants of Ninja, while Red Pillar and Silver Hammer are harder versions of Tower. I don't know why they didn't just use the hardest version of both instead of having two types you gotta deal with on the same island, but whatever. Caterpillar is a far better version of Strider, because you don't gotta deal with your vision being blocked, and I just find the red orbs more fun to dodge than the fireballs. Also, bouncing on his back when he's vulnerable is fun and looks dumb. Ghost, meanwhile, is my favorite mini-boss in the whole game, interestingly being the only one who leaves you alone as long as you don't bother him. Once you do activate the fight, it'll fly around and sap your rings, with you needing to navigate this obstacle course to loop his statues, and once you've looped all of them, the fight's over. It's really fun, but sadly, since he's on the last island and it's hard to recognize where he is, considering he's hidden until you activate the fight, you don't really get to face off with him often, and most of the time you won't really know where he is. In terms of story, first I want to say I think it's a bit weird that the main character you're interacting here with is Sage and not Eggman, especially since I liked the few interactions he and Sonic had. I mean, on all the other islands there were already some optional interactions with Sage as it is. I think we could have eased up a little bit, especially since I would have liked to hear the banter Sonic and Eggman would have had in a more laid-back conversation. Most of the story on the final island is tying up loose ends mostly, like for instance, Sage had all these characters put into cyberspace to try and make sure they'd be safe when the destruction happens, just her communication skills suck. We also get some more insight on the Ancients' landing here. We get to hear more about them using cyberspace to preserve all their knowledge, what some of the structures mean, how they're unfinished because they were all killed off while trying to still settle into the place, and basically all that kind of stuff. Sage also mentions that the last surviving Ancients moved to a different land with the Chaos Emeralds, which fuels that theory from earlier, and that she called the Emeralds here in hopes of stopping the unknown threat, and yeah, that's about it for this island. There's not much story stuff until the final boss happens, and it's mostly a scramble to get the emeralds before Doomsday. Once we get the 6 emeralds, Eggman arrives on the scene to get us the 7th, and we head out to stop the last giant. For being the penultimate boss, this one is surprisingly really lame. Honestly, it feels like a more souped up Giganto than anything special. I mean, sure, you have a lot more stuff to dodge and get blown back way more often, but his health bar gets killed so fast and none of that matters, which leaves it one of the least memorable bosses here. Funnily enough, a lot of the times when you're fighting him, you'll drain his health bar so quickly the game can't keep up, so you're stuck doing nothing until the QuickTime event decides to play. Now, if you're playing on normal mode, the game ends here. I mean, I get that playing on normal isn't the complete experience, but man, the game just sort of ends, huh? If we play on hard, we get the true final boss, and boy, does it leave a lot to unpack. Starts out pretty good though. Our foe escapes the Titan and flies off. Sage knows Supersonic can't beat the thing on its own, so she tells Eggman that no matter what, she has to go help Sonic and the Titan, and man, the voice delivery on that line when Eggman sends her off. That was really good and hit surprisingly hard. Sage takes control of Supreme, with her and Sonic taking off to space, and that leaves us with the final boss, the end. bit odd having a cosmic level planet as the final boss. I mean, some games have done stuff like this before. Give it an eye, it's a Kirby boss. Give it a mouth, it's a Terraria boss. But either way, I want to talk about what it's supposed to be exactly. But firstly, let's rip the band-aid off right now. Why in God's name is it another one of those shooter sections? I mean, come on, guys. That was a fun mini-game, but you don't close the game with that. Are you fucking serious? This is such an anticlimactic and flaccid way of ending the game that it almost undervalues the ending, cause with a high-stakes finale like this we haven't seen in a while, you could expect something closer to Final Hazard, Neo Metal Sonic, Perfect Dark Gaia. Hell, as garbage of a fight as it was, even the Time Eater felt like something more appropriate for a final boss than a sugar section. What's funny though is that I can't even get mad at it too much because even though it's not what I ordered, I can still enjoy it inherently because I like shoot 'em ups. I mean, this is still a solid one, just come on, dude. We could have had a final boss similar to the one in Unleashed with Sonic and Sage working in tandem with you having a swap between them mid-fight. It could have been super cool. As it stands, it's an alright fight. The only sour spot is having the same problem as Supreme, where sometimes you shave down its health too fast and sit there while it monologues. But yeah, just an odd way to go out. I want to talk about story stuff though, because while the fight has some missed potential, I think from a story perspective, it might miss out even more. So yeah, we knew this was the voice Sonic was hearing in his head, and he just kind of decided to go along with it, seeing as he didn't have anything else to do, and Sage seemed like the most important threat at the moment. The End was trapped in cyberspace, and by Sonic not only destroying all the Titans, but also merging cyberspace with the real world on Rhea Island with all the towers and stuff, which is why they say at the start of Island 4, tear apart the walls between dimensions. What I'm interested in with the End, though, is this line director Morio Kishimoto said on a Japanese Sonic live stream, quote, "Well, actually we haven't revealed the true form of the last boss in this game yet, so what we see over there is what the player sees, but not what it really is." The way I and a lot of others take this is that the End represents death, and the player is the only one that can see this purple moon, cause for everyone else, they see what they imagine death to be. Dude, this concept had so much potential, and I really wish it was better reflected in-game. The one idea I had for Sage is, what if it kept rapidly swapping between the previous Titans, reminding her of the mistakes she made and sending them after Sonic, instead of trying to work with him, leading her to pretty much have a hand in all this happening. For Sonic, I mean, God, the two I keep bouncing between is an amalgamation of all the godlike entities he's faced previously, taunting him that no matter how powerful these literal gods like Perfect Chaos or Solaris were, the End will always be stronger, which is pretty much what it already does in some of the mid-fight dialogue. My favorite idea, though, that a couple of people have also had, hear me out because it banks on them being willing to accept the bad games more, what if Sonic's representation of the End was Mephiles? I mean, Sonic's fought through a lot of insanely strong opponents, but there's only a single one of those that actually won. It'd make too much sense for Sonic's perception of death to be the one foe he couldn't outrun and that actually killed him, and I mean, doesn't that just sound like the rawest shit of all time, like genuinely? At the end of the day though, haha, no matter what this boss could have been either from a gameplay or story perspective, we explode the purple moon and in an effort to make sure the End is gone for good, Sage sacrifices herself to take it down. Now, nothing's come after this yet, so we don't know if this is a Gamma sacrifice or a Shadow sacrifice, but either way, I think it was a very well done scene. The scene right after the boss kinda hits hard, honestly. Sonic flies down and hugs all his friends now that they're out of cyberspace. Meanwhile, Eggman just looks up at the sky solemnly, with the only person who actually liked him being gone, which, despite its ups and downs, was a very good ending to this arc. It's one of the slower endings in the series, almost being reminiscent to me of SA2's, which, if you recall when I talked about that game, I really enjoyed, so it was nice to get something with a similar spirit again. The game ends on Sonic and his friends getting ready to do some needed R&R, and now with them having some goals in mind after what they learned from this adventure. It's a nice little conclusion, but I'm actually not thinking about any of that. I'm thinking about the fact Amy name-drops Styx, which implies at the very least she exists in this canon, and now I have to wonder if other elements of Boom are canon too, or if she's just been randomly inserted in here, which I guess that did happen in Worlds Unite in the comics. That's the second time I've mentioned that crossover in this video, which is 2 times more than I expected it to be referenced. What's interesting, though, is the after-credits scene, which I'll be happy to actually dissect now, considering both times I got to this cutscene, it was 4 in the morning. We see Eggman messing with this computer until the ancient symbol appears on screen, where Sage seems to have been brought back. This tells us something very important. That being, this was a shadow sacrifice, but this also connects to the theory from earlier. This is the part I was waiting on to mention again. Sage gets brought back in the same way the Ancients did when they got brought back as the Koco. In my version of it, that means they had some purpose they wanted to fulfill that they didn't get the chance to complete before they passed on, so what's the deal with Sage then? Well, my interpretation is that she found her purpose on the final island, where we get some closure to her arc with Eggman, where Sonic tells her that he probably does care about her, and how she also learned to start trusting people through all the interactions with Sonic there. When she finally was starting to develop, and it seemed like she could have led a much different and happier life had she stayed alive, it was cut short in the fight with the end, and so she got brought back like the Ancients did. Of course, you could also argue that her finalizing both of her arcs before the fight means she should have led a complete life and would have died like the theory I had suggests. I don't know, dude. This was just my interpretation of things. I certainly didn't make this water tiger or anything. It's just what I picked up. And I will say, though, isn't it nuts that I can actually speculate about a Sonic game? It's been so long since I've gotten invested in a Sonic story, and in so many games before this, there's been nothing to pick apart. It's just fun to be able to think on a Sonic story, have a lot of moving parts to dissect, wonder how it affects the lore, where before, the lore was at best unaffected, or at worst, blatantly disregarded. This is effectively our wrap-up session, and yeah, if you couldn't tell, I like this game. I like this game. It feels so good to say that. Sure, I did have my qualms, both gameplay and story-wise, but at the end of the day, if someone walked up to me and asked if the last Sonic game was good, I'd be able to actually say yes. I want to talk about where I wanted Sonic to go, because I talked a lot in that last video, and I think it's important to mention. In a lot of areas, it does check the boxes I had in focusing more on character moments, having improved writing. Hell, even in some of the interviews with the director post-release, they seem committed to this new direction with Sonic. I say this to illustrate that the game isn't a masterpiece, but it still has a lot of traits of my ideal vision for the direction Sonic was going to take. Because I didn't want to come off as impossible to please or anything. The one area I still feel like it faltered was them having confidence in Sonic as a character, cause with how the pre-release handled things, it felt like they were scared and had no idea how to market this thing. It does feel like they're gaining some of that confidence back though, which is only being shown further by the promise of 3 waves of DLC, all of which will be entirely free. I mean, check this out. Challenge modes, open zone challenges, an unknown new type of Koco, and best of all, the final wave promising a new story and, mother of God, new playable characters, finally. If all this stuff is as good as it sounds, then we're really in for a treat here, and once all the waves are released, I would totally be open to returning to this game to tackle the new content. What I want to end off with, though, is how this game connected with me, and barring Sonic Mania, I haven't been connected with a Sonic game like this in a while, and at this point, it's been so long since Mania that even that could qualify as a long while. It made me feel excited again to dive right in, which only made me feel better considering how skeptical I was going in. I was scrutinizing this stuff even harder while I was actually playing, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't blinded like I was with Forces and that I was actually enjoying myself, which made me feel extremely happy when I realized that I was genuinely having a good time. What was also nice to see was just how many people were enjoying the game. Seeing many who weren't even part of the Sonic sphere having their fair share of fun, it was impactful, and I can't lie, it was also exciting that no matter the rough edges, I was truly enjoying a Sonic game again, and it makes me so happy to say that. Following everything leading up to the game coming out, it's so crazy that despite my hesitancy and how the game just didn't look great, I enjoyed it as much as I did. It's not a perfect game, and I will admit there are a good deal of Sonic games I prefer to it, but on the whole, I like Sonic Frontiers, and goddammit, that's good enough for me.